You shouldn't trust your emotions all the time. They're constantly changing. They're not reliable, and many of them are not based in truth. I got this idea where I wanted to talk about this because I was thinking about how we all experience a variety of different emotions throughout our day, from day to day, week to week. Like one day you can feel like you're on top, and then the next day you feel like you're not sure of yourself. You don't know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. So the question is really, how do we know that we can experience our own thoughts and emotions and be able to talk about them? It's because we as humans have self-awareness, and self-awareness is by definition the awareness of our ability to recognize and understand our own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. So if I break this down further, the self is what we refer to as ourself and the amalgamation of our thoughts and emotions and behaviors. And awareness is seeing. Think of like awareness in two ways. One is you're seeing, like your eyes are seeing of the world, like you have a vision from your eyes that you're seeing the world. You're seeing what exists, what is. And then this is how you see things as they are in the present moment. And then there's also vision in the sense of being a visionary, someone that can envision possibilities of what isn't here now, and they can envision it for, let's say, a future. So all of this phenomena basically can be observed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to talk about this. Like we're the apex of human evolution because we have this ability to recollect our past while existing in a stable present and be prepared for an indeterminable future, all because we have this self-awareness. Now, when we have all these advancements like today with AI and all the technology we have, we think that we can predict the future, but we forget that we cannot compute the future based on just the present and the past alone. It's not enough data because the future by definition is something that is different from the past. It's not the same as the past in all cases. So the future is actually new territory that you're manifesting, that you're exploring, that you're stepping into from the present. We know that our eyes always look out into the world, but we have this awareness of what's happening within ourselves. You don't see your thoughts, quote unquote, like externally, but you see them inside, So I guess one philosophical is like, well, what eyes are looking inside, right? But put that aside for a second. I think the ability to consciously process what is changing within you and in your external environment is the best way to apply your self-awareness. And it also is important to mention that what we know is stable, we tend to ignore. It becomes unconscious. It's also called like an axiomatic assumption, meaning like this roof over my head, I know is not going to fall down unless I've been ignoring a massive leak in the walls for months and months, and like now it's about to crumble down, right? So you take it for granted that, okay, sitting in this chair, it's not going to fall over, this ceiling is not going to collapse over me. So you ignore these things. So then your awareness really can be focused only on the things that are continuously changing. So you can see the differences from where it was to where it is now. So basically everything that's predictable, which is not the future because it's not predictable, disappears from our conscious awareness and it becomes like a subroutine. So everything that we know, like I'm sure you can all relate to like an example of driving where you're not really thinking about where you're going. You just have done it so many times. You just know exactly what you're going to be doing next, when to push the brake, when to accelerate, steer, and things like that. It's become like this unconscious subroutine. And obviously you've only gotten that with conscious practice, right? And now it's become a subroutine, so you don't think about it too many times before you make like, a left turn or whatever. Okay, so this is all great. I've given you some really interesting information, but what can you do from all this information? Well, if you go back to the premise that we experience a volatility of emotions and thoughts, we know this because all of us have a level of self-awareness about our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors. So then we can say we're capable of noticing these things, that they're fleeting and they ultimately don't all come true. Like many of the ideas and thoughts and emotions you feel are temporary, they're volatile, they do not persist. There's hardly any emotion that anyone can feel all the time. There's hardly a thought that you can hold on to. And you can try this as an exercise. See if you can think of a thought and see how long can you hold that thought in your mind. Can you even go an entire, an hour? Can you go a day holding that same thought? You'll see how difficult it actually is. So there's a volatility in your thinking, in your behavior, in your mood. And I'm bringing this up because what you notice is when you have all these thoughts and emotions and behaviors that you act out, what you may not realize is you end up selecting a few thoughts from your constant thinking mind to then proceed with. It's like you can have 100 different thoughts and then you take an action. For example, let's say you sit down and think about what could I be doing today. What happens is then you traverse through all the various options for suitability and you end up picking the option that you see fit. In a way, this is like natural selection taking place in the abstract thinking. It's the survival of the fittest idea. And what happens to your other ideas? You kill them off, right? They're gone. they're not there anymore. So I bring all this up because anxiety, when we experience it, it's something where we get attached to a specific thought or an emotion or a behavior that we think is going to play out for real. Like we feel that it's actually really, really real. Like we don't think of it as an abstraction. Like we don't, in that moment of anxiety, don't believe that our thoughts are an abstraction. We believe that they are real, that we believe that they are actually happening. They're actually playing out. The emotions we feel that are attached to those thoughts are actually felt in the body. Like those chemicals are actually released. Like, so it is a difficult thing to distinguish between that being something not real. So I guess what an example of this could be, I sometimes get anxiety while being on an airplane where I can have an anxious thought, like especially if it's high turbulence and maybe I've had some, edible or something, just to make things worse, right? It's like where, okay, all of a sudden I feel like, okay, I'm gonna crash, like this plane is gonna crash, and I have an anxiety and I freak out about it. In that heat of that moment, external reality doesn't actually match what my internal fear or my anxiety is. Like, yes, I'm on a plane, I'm like 35,000 feet in the air, there is like shaking excessively, and there's a possibility that we may go down, but in that moment, I'm not able to distinguish the difference between my anxiety as being super real to me and the actuality of what is, what exists in the present moment. There's a disconnect, and I think it's a very subtle point, which I think it's very difficult to explain. But in my attempt at doing that, I'm trying to say that you feel anxious and it feels very real to you, and you believe that to be the reality of your existence. When maybe at a later point, at a different point in reflecting, you can see that that was not it. Like that was a passing state of experience. It was not something that was absolute or objectively real. So if you have that awareness around it, then you don't necessarily have to get bogged down by that anxious state, because it's going to pass, and you can have that freak out. Sure, you can feel anxious, you can feel the emotions, but it's not something that is going to last forever. I think the whole concept so far, insofar as talking about self-awareness, is to make the realization that because we have self-awareness, we're able to see the volatility of our emotions, and because we're able to see the volatility of our emotions in our worst of states, when we do feel anxious or when we do face a catastrophe in life, we know that that's also going to pass. The old saying, like, this too shall pass. It almost is very real. I don't think there's anything more real than that. Like, the only thing constant in life is change. Another important idea that I want to stress in this video is, how do you move through life when you're going to be faced with uncertainty of the future, with anxieties and catastrophes in life? Well, one of the things that is often talked about on the subject matter that really catches me and has worked for me as well is having a vision for yourself. So go back to earlier when we talked about self-awareness. There's the vision that you see from your eyes of the external world of what is. Then there's envisioning, which of course you can view what is happening within you, your own thoughts, your own emotions, but you can also envision a possibility, an idea, an ideation of a possible future which isn't here yet. And having this vision, or envisioning a game, an identity, or a way of being, or an ethos for yourself that can actually help sustain you for the inevitable catastrophe or catastrophic moments of your life, is really the antidote to this suffering that we all face and will face in our life at some point or another. So it's like, I guess the question becomes then, what kind of vision do you need to build that's going to sustain you for both big and small catastrophes that are going to inevitably come upon your life sooner or later? And this is where you can really dissect from a behavior perspective. When you make plans, when you make small plans, or when you make large plans, they all have to somehow tie together into this great vision of you and of yourself, so that it can sustain you when things go wrong, when you're gonna get, pushed around by life. And if you don't have a strong enough vision, then what's gonna happen at the sign of turmoil, at the sign of chaos, is, you're gonna falter, you're gonna fall over, and you're not gonna be able to persist. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's like having a very, very close-knit vision, taking your vision to extreme depths of clarity, like being very specific on a very deep level about exactly what you want out of life, will actually help you sustain you from all the worst challenges in life. So after all, every day, day in and day out, we play a game with ourselves based on what we want out of life, whether you're doing this consciously or you're doing this unconsciously. Because you could be watching this and say, well, that's not me, I don't really have any plans. But I can show you that you may not count what you're doing as being planned because it might be too short term, but even something as simple as like, I'm going to go to the kitchen and grab a snack is technically a plan. And if we go back to what I said earlier, this process of natural selection within your own thoughts becomes the basis of your behavior and action, whether you do it consciously or unconsciously. And in the case where you're unconscious or you're unaware of your own thinking, you can be doing a bunch of things that are not coherent and that don't have a cohesive strategy for your life. And then that can definitely spiral you to more hopelessness, depression, and more anxiety. But the other side of that is to remember that any thought is basically a plan. And when you filter through your thoughts and the further you take your thinking, your thoughts don't have to be a complete plan, but if you recursively think through all the macro and the micro details of a plan, which again is contingent on your own attention span and your ability to focus, which by the way, you can actually build muscle and practice. Nonetheless, like you can't plan for everything in the future, which is why you're going to fail a lot. But if you can have a big enough vision that is cohesive, that where all your micro actions move you towards a macro vision, then you can effectively sustain yourself through catastrophes of life, because there's no question that we're all going to face catastrophes and atrocities in our life, and your vision has to be able to sustain you through those. And this involves you to be able to think big, and it involves you to think small enough as well, so you can make these micro plans. And when you build these micro plans up daily, you move it on this upward spiral that can help you coherently move towards a macro vision of what you want when it's all integrated well together. Now, one of the things, if you are looking at how you can do this, is it's been known that voluntary exposure to challenges and doing things that are hard will make you more capable of handling the challenges of life. Now, that sounds very obvious and self-evident when I say it that way, but it's not so obvious when you're in an uncoordinated state. So the gym example is probably a good one to bring up. It's like the gym is hard, right? Not everybody can make it. Meditation is hard. Self-reflection is hard. Writing, analyzing, planning out your thoughts, it's all hard. Executing on a micro, daily, and continuous way, all aimed toward a bigger macro vision, is hard. But if you can do these hard things voluntarily, even if you do them poorly, okay, it will make you strong enough to tolerate catastrophes both in your real life and in your abstract life, which is your thoughts. So in real life sense, we're all going to have to face the death of our parents. And in an abstract sense, we're all going to have to face with the anxiety of, for me, exactly like in my earlier example of like the plane crashing, or the anxiety of, what am I going to do when, my parents suddenly pass away, let's say. I hope that never happens, but ultimately we all have to face the death of our loved ones in our life. So what would you be like at that moment in time? Would you be able to tolerate that catastrophe? Would you be able to rise again from that moment? Or would you falter because you simply are unable to manage those things because you don't have a driving force or a driving vision that's going to be able to take you out of that hole when you're in it? So in a nutshell, the best thing you can do is pay attention to your world and your own thoughts and emotions and behaviors with an open eye, fully open, becoming aware of everything that's going on. And obviously your awareness is going to be focused on the things that change. Just staring at a wall that doesn't move is not going to really add more insight. So, keeping your awareness sharp on the things that are changing is going to constantly keep you at the forefront of the present moment, which is translating into the future for which you are prepared for, because you have a vision, a strong identity about what it is that you want out of life. And you have micro plans that all lead towards a macro vision that are going to set you up to tolerate any chaos, any catastrophe, any atrocity and anxiety and low emotions in life. So both in the real sense and in an abstract sense, your vision has to be sustainable to get you through the hardest parts of life. And this is something that I believe not many of us are ever taught or told, and especially now, more or less with all the content we all consume. I just want to add to this discussion around anxiety and self-awareness, where I really genuinely believe, like, even for me, the hardest thing I've ever faced in my life was a deep depression and a constant anxious state. And the way I got around them was to enhance my own self-awareness. So I hope you found this helpful. Let me know your thoughts.